It was on June 7, 1776, a little over a year after the War for Independence began at Lexington and Concord, that here, at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Virginian Richard Henry Lee introduced a motion to the Continental Congress to separate the colonies from Great Britain. Leaders from all 13 colonies gathered to debate the matter. A draft of the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4, 1776. Focused on the basic human rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it declared the independence of the United States from Great Britain.
And almost 11 years after they signed their name to this document, another group of men would walk in this room that form our government.
The colonists had realized that the Articles of Confederation, which had governed them to this point, had to be revised. Under the Articles, each colony was a sovereign state with its own currency. The national legislature, known as Congress, had no power to tax or to enforce any laws it made. There was no executive or judicial branch, and the states held most of the powers of government.
The Congress said, well, we need to make some changes to the Articles of Confederation. So, they come in this room in 1787. They show up in May. For 4 months, they're in here. Well, by the 17th of September, they walk out of this building with a brand new Constitution.
The new Constitution was built on compromises. Although delegates readily agreed upon a three-branch government, executive, judicial, and legislative, there was much debate over how each state would be represented in Congress. The Great Compromise resulted in a bicameral or two-house legislature and created the House and Senate as we now know them, with states sending 2 representatives to the Senate and a number of House delegates based on population. The need for a written constitution that would guarantee the rights of all the people was something everyone agreed on. After years of rule by the British monarchy, the colonists wanted assurances of their rights in writing.
The Constitution, as I read it, doesn't say I in order to form a more perfect union. It says we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And that means that these men understood that a just government depends on a written constitution, not on the personal whims of a human leader. And whatever power this government has comes from and can be reclaimed by those it governs.
The Constitution was printed, circulated, and debated during the process of ratification. 2 opposing groups emerged during this debate.
From the very beginning, when these men are meeting here in Philadelphia as the capital, we don't have a political party set up yet. We have what we call Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Now, you had 2 basic ideologies going on here, Hamilton's philosophy and Thomas Jefferson's philosophy. Under the Hamilton's philosophy, he believed in a strong central government by creating a banking system and a mint to give the nation a common currency. Whereas Jefferson, on the other hand, thinks of an agrarian type of society where people are self-sufficient.
The Federalists believed in a strong central government. The Anti-Federalists feared that a powerful central government would minimize the role of the people in governing themselves and threaten individual rights and local interests. The failure to include a Bill of Rights also gave rise to widespread dissatisfaction.
The Bill of Rights would be adopted in 1791. The Bill of Rights are important. Why? Because it defines us as a citizen. Matter of fact, without the Bill of Rights, this document I'm holding in my hand would crumble to the ground.
Only 7,000 words in length, the Constitution that was created right here in Independence Hall has successfully guided the United States through 2 centuries of growth and change. And it remains to this day as vital and enduring as ever. explain the following quotation from the video. "A just government depends on a written constitution, not on the personal whims of a human leader." Although freed enslaved African Americans were given the right to vote in 1870, their civil rights continued to be denied in many parts of the country through physical intimidation and tactics such as literacy tests. In fact, the basic equality promised by the Constitution was denied well into the 20th century. School segregation, in which blacks and whites attended separate schools, was widespread. In 1954, the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education. Linda Brown, an African-American student in Topeka, Kansas, had been denied entrance to a local all-white school. In its unanimous decision, the court declared that state-sanctioned segregation of schools was unconstitutional, a violation of the 14th Amendment. But many states still refused to integrate their schools. On September 4th, 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower had to order paratroopers and National Guardsmen to Little Rock, Arkansas, when townspeople prevented 9 African-American students from entering the high school. Schools were not the only places where African Americans faced segregation. In 1955, Rosa Parks, an African American seamstress from Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her seat on a public bus to a white rider. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, which young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was chosen to lead. This leadership position catapulted him to the forefront of the civil rights movement. And in 1961, busloads of people waged a campaign called the Freedom Rides, aimed at challenging the segregation of interstate buses and bus terminals. These non-violent protests through the South were often met with brutality. Sit-ins at lunch counters were another challenge to segregation. In this form of nonviolent protest, African Americans sat at lunch counters, which refused service to them. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and jailed after he participated in sit-ins at lunch counters. On June 19, 1963, President Kennedy sent Congress a civil rights bill offering federal protection to African Americans seeking to vote, shop, eat out, and be educated on equal terms.
We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century. This is what we're talking about, and this is a matter which concerns this country and what it stands for.
At the same time, civil rights leaders were planning the largest political demonstration ever in the United States. On August 28, 1963, a crowd estimated in the hundreds of thousands gathered in the nation's capital and overflowed the area of the mall between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke last.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. When all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Hey, keep on up,
"I Have a Dream" became instantly famous, and the phrase remains the most memorable of the civil rights movement to this day. Just 3 months later, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Civil rights leaders were devastated. But as a continuation of Kennedy's vision, under President Lyndon Johnson, 2 landmark pieces of civil rights legislation were passed. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, outlawing discrimination in public accommodations, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which authorized federal intervention in cases of voter discrimination. Four decades later, America has made great strides in fulfilling its promise to provide civil rights for all. Yet, there are still obstacles in the workplace, in the voting booth, and in public education. It is up to every American to help make the changes necessary to make true equality a reality for all. How can average citizens help assure the civil rights promised to all citizens by the Constitution? Women's struggle for equality parallels the civil rights movement. During World War II, women took on the jobs of men who were sent to war. But when the men returned, the women gave up those jobs. In the 1950s, women made up only about a quarter of the entire workforce in the United States. With the 1960s and 70s, the number of women in the workforce increased, along with the calls for equal opportunity. In the 1970s, 30 to 40 million women worked. In the 80s, between 42 and 53 million women were part of the labor force. And between 1990 and 1999, the number of female workers grew from over 53 million to just over 62 million. More recently, the figure has risen to over 63 million employed women. Today, women play a critical role in building a strong economy. However, there are still hurdles for women in the workplace. Women still earn less than men and struggle with childcare issues. What are some reasons why women join the workforce today?